CNN political analyst, New York Times Washington correspondent. Maggie Haberman has just written about his possible motives, joins us now. So you raise, there's a bunch of different explanations, but you raise one possibility that this may be more about the former president's personality than anything else.
It could be, and he was certainly known as somebody who liked to show things off. He liked to show off the accoutrements of being president.
Tchotchkes, you had called them.
When he was a businessman, he had tchotchkes in some corner of his office. Shaquille O'Neal's giant shoe, he would show off a lot to visitors, and it was always the same tour. He liked showing off these Kim Jong-un letters when he was president. People would come to the Oval Office, reporters, visiting dignitaries, you name it, and he would wave them around. And we know that at least some of those were among the items that were at Mar-a-Lago. So that's one possibility. We know that he was telling advisors when he was resisting giving these things back, they're mine, it's mine, and so forth. So that's always one possibility. The other is that he, sees, one other is that he sees some advantage, and whether that is something that makes him seem aggrandized or bigger, or whether it's that he could see it as leverage of some kind, you have to consider that possibility. There's a lot we still don't know, but Trump throughout his presidency acted as if there was no difference between himself and the government and his company. It was all one big brand.
When I was, we've talked about this before, when I went to his apartment to interview him long ago, I was obsessed. He had this fake Renoir painting. It's a famous Renoir painting, Renoir Two Sisters. It's a very valuable painting if it's real. This is the fake he had in his house, and it's a pretty bad fake because I pulled up the original and I looked at the original right next to it. The real one's in the Art Institute of Chicago, but he swears that is the real one. He has continued to push that for a long time. Is that sort of in that same vein of like, he just likes to show off stuff that he has?
Yeah, look, again, that part of the me aspect of this is self-aggrandizement. And so claiming a Renoir that you're able to pretty easily tell looking at the internet is not real, is part of that self-aggrandizement. That could absolutely be what this was.
These are real documents.
Right. These are real documents, and we don't know why he had them. And we do know that he was being told to give them back repeatedly, and it took many, many months in 2021, and then he finally sent back some, but not all. And so there was a much longer fight. I don't want to sound as if we're minimizing the potential harm or potential lawbreaking or anything else in saying that he simply treated this all as if it was about himself. And then where it went from that, we don't know.
You've also reported on how this is sort of emblematic of, in general, how he dealt with documents. Flushing them down the toilet, ripping them up.
Yes, he was sloppy. There was, documents would be ripped up. There were people who would have to go through his trash or go through the floor and tape them back together and give them to the staff secretary so that they could be looked at to see whether they had to be preserved under the Presidential Records Act, which has existed since, after Nixon, when Nixon wanted to leave the White House with documents and tapes, and then it became law. And Trump is supposed to be abiding by that. He never wanted to. He would take classified material or try to up to the residence. John Kelly, the second White House chief of staff, tried really hard to keep him from doing that. I think that some of those constraints that Kelly tried putting in place, Trump definitely bristled at, and it's not clear to me what it looked like by 2020.
Politically, what does the former president gain or lose if the affidavit is released?
So it depends, Anderson, because we don't know what's in it. And obviously, several media outlets, including my own, have argued that it should be released. The Justice Department is arguing against it. Trump's folks, I think, gain more by arguing, see, the Justice Department won't unseal it, because if they thought there was advantage to this, to him in a real way, I think he would be getting into this fight himself. You'll notice his lawyers have not filed anything in this case. His lawyer was there observing the proceedings today, but it's allies of Trump who are going about arguing the same case as the media. I think he sees more advantage in being seen as somebody being victimized, because as we saw with the warrant, when the warrant was unsealed, it was not unalloyed good news for Trump, as a lot of people around him had been intimating. If not good news, at least neutral news. The statutes there are problematic for him. And so I suspect that the affidavit would have similar issues.